Welcome back to Outrage Science Bites, where we dig into the science behind our increasingly polarized world and look at what we can do to navigate it in bite-sized episodes. Today's episode is all about healthy conflict, how we can disagree passionately without giving in to outrage. We'll explore the delicate balance of standing up for what's right while avoiding the destructive forces of hate and violence. This isn't easy. It's one of the hardest things to do in a deeply divided society, but it's not impossible. Throughout history, we've seen examples of people and movements that have managed to push for justice and change while rejecting violent conflict. To help us unpack this idea, we have insights from two experts. Peter Coleman, a conflict resolution expert and the author of The Way Out, How to Overcome Toxic Polarization, and Zachary Elwood, author of several books aimed at reducing toxic political polarization in America, who will guide us through how to navigate these turbulent waters. Let's start by hearing from Peter Coleman, who talks about the challenge of holding two seemingly contradictory thoughts at the same time: the need to fight for justice and the need to avoid political violence.
Well, so I've spent, 40 years now working in conflict and conflict resolution, and it's not a feel-good industry. We spend a lot of time in heat. We spend a lot of time in very difficult conversations and trying to reach very difficult solutions. And this is no different than all of that. This is not, being nice and getting along. This is basically trying to avoid civil war and the spikes in political violence, keep us in conversation in ways that are reasonable. I think the problem is that humans have a hard time holding two contradictory thoughts in their head at the same time. And there are two contradictory realities right now. We need to fight for those things that we think are true and real and serious threats to, for example, to democracy. And we need to do it in a way that avoids political violence. We need to do both, right? And so that's what I say to my colleagues, because I have a lot of colleagues who are peace builders, or not peace builders, who are social activists, who are really about, this is the time to fight. Look at what the Supreme Court is doing. Look at what, the states are doing. It's really time to mobilize and fight. I don't disagree with that. I think civil protests, civil disobedience, marching, I think that's very warranted in times like this. And we don't want to tip into hate and vitriol and oversimplifications of all of them. We need to be able to hold a more nuanced understanding of the other, right? And, Martin Luther King was able to do that. Gandhi was able to do that. There have been many, advocates, social advocates for justice that have been able to hold both. We don't want violence, but we do want justice. How do we shepherd that forward? That's what I say to those folks.
The fight for justice and democratic values is essential, but it has to be grounded in nonviolence, as modeled by leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. This can feel like walking on a tightrope, especially in today's environment where tensions run high and anger can easily boil over into something more dangerous. What Coleman emphasizes, and what is critical for all of us to reflect on, is that holding two opposing ideas at once, like fighting for what we believe in while avoiding hatred, isn't a sign of weakness or compromise. It's actually a strength. It takes deep moral clarity and discipline to pursue justice while rejecting hate. But how do we do this when the people on the other side of a conflict seem so far away? How can we engage in healthy conflict when both sides feel the other is the problem? That's where our next expert, Zachary Elwood, comes in. He discusses how bias and asymmetries between groups complicate conflict resolution, but also why humility and responsibility are key, no matter where you stand.
One can see the other side as worse and more contributing to the divide, the toxicity of the divides, while feeling it's very important to work on reducing those divides, because conflict it's complex. Conflict is very complex, and that should tell us that we should take some humility about the nature of the divides and really not let our animosity towards the other side get in the way of us working on the problem. And groups are asymmetrical in a conflict. It's hard. They can be hard to compare. For example, there's educational polarization. There's the fact that liberals really control a lot of the institutions in society. Academia, mainstream media, entertainment media. So just to say that the conflicts can be quite complex, and we can be prone to seeing the conflict how we want to see it, and using that as an excuse to not help. Whereas I think we should embrace some humility and ask, what can we do on our side to solve these things, right? Which no matter who we think is worse in these things, right?
Elwood hits on something crucial. Conflict is often asymmetrical, meaning one group may hold more power or influence over institutions, but that doesn't mean the solution is simple. His call for humility is powerful because it reframes the conflict. Instead of pointing fingers and waiting for the other side to fix things, it asks us to take responsibility, to recognize our own biases, and to be proactive in healing divides. One of the most challenging aspects of today's political climate is that people often feel like they're in a tug of war where letting go means losing everything. But we can't wait for things to be perfectly balanced or for the other side to act first. It takes leadership from within, from each of us, to acknowledge our own role in the conflict and start bridging the gaps. So what does healthy conflict look like? It's conflict that allows space for disagreement without falling into hate, that strives for justice without demanding victory at all costs. It's about finding common ground, but also being able to stand your ground on the issues that matter, without letting anger control your actions. The temptation to demonize the other side is always present, but it's important to realize that it's possible to disagree, sometimes even fiercely, without losing our sense of shared humanity. Healthy conflict is about striking a balance between standing up for what is right and rejecting the allure of violence, anger, and outrage. We'll have more practical guidance on this in upcoming episodes. Thank you for listening to this episode of Outrage Science Bites. If you found this discussion valuable, you may want to check out the long-form Outrage Overload podcast. Visit outrageoverload.net for past episodes, links, and contact information. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we continue this series on the psychology of polarization with a discussion about why we think we have a monopoly on the facts.